Oh, am I alive? Okay, I'm dumb. Let's see here. So the one I'm gonna work on at the moment is this little fish guy somewhere down here. This little guy here follows this little motion curve, and you can see he kind of swoops down, then comes up and slows down up on this arc, and then eases back into a little downward and does a little flip, another down and up. And for this guy, I'm going to be doing the tail, which is basically going to show overlapping action and follow through. And then the other thing I'm going to work on is this little jellyfish. I already got the keys here squashed and stretched up, and I thought it might be interesting to have him kind of turn into a goop and then loop back around into his squashed position. And then there's a fish here, right here. Let me turn this other one off. This guy, I already planned out the action with this motion path, and this kind of acts as a guide that keeps things consistent and helps you to think about what you're doing, so you don't have to think about what you're doing as much. So I'm just gonna start animating this guy and show you the logical process, the stages I would go in. Zoom in a little bit. So as you can see, there's kind of some different parts of this guy. You got the eye, you've got fins, and you've got these little appendages. And instead of just animating each frame exactly like this, pose to pose, it's easier on something like this to animate one part at a time. So I know the eye is leading the action, so I'm actually just gonna start animating the eye straight ahead. And this is gonna be basically on 2s. It's at 8 frames a second right now, so that I know that there's gonna be in-betweens here. So I know that later on I'd draw a pose in between here to make it more smooth. So I'm keeping that in mind as I'm doing this. And just following this arcing motion. And then you'll notice right around here, you'll notice that the what is this called? The pupil is gonna start turning in 3D rotation. I'll come in a little bit and do that, but you can see that right when it gets to about here, the eyeball is starting to look more towards us. And it's gonna bunch up a little bit. Whenever you come to a hard change in direction, like it's coming from the left here, but now it's gonna go to the right, things will tend to slow down. It won't just whip with the same momentum in the opposite direction. So this is where things are gonna start to ease in a little bit and bunch together more before it starts to ease out and pick up momentum. And then up here, I'm gonna have him slow down just like if it was a bouncing ball. At the apex of the bounce, it would start to slow down, cluster together, and then ease out. And of course, this fish is a living thing. It's not just like a ball. So I might do a little bit more erratic movements to show it almost coming to a stop and then using its flipper to pick up speed. But for right now, I just kind of want this fish gliding along. And like I said, if I were trying to animate the whole fish, everything all at once, you kind of lose track of the momentum and the inertia that you have going. It's just so much easier to think about what is the thing leading the motion, animate that first, and then go back over and add the second most important thing, and then finally all the loose bits last. But already we've got 35 frames in. And then it's gonna, once I go and start trying to figure out the 3D shape here, the eye's gonna turn in perspective over here again and start facing the opposite direction. What's up, Solely Sold Short? Nick Sketch. This is TV Paint 11. I'm probably not gonna get the new TV Paint 12. I'm actually saving up for Toon Boom. But I'll still use TV Paint for certain stuff. It's also, I'm kind of keeping a few frames of the light box behind me. Normally I wouldn't keep this many, but it's helpful to see as I'm getting closer to here, I know that this is about to where it's gonna loop. So I'm gonna take the first frame and actually I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna cut this guy out because I know this is basically the first frame. I'm gonna cut this guy out and paste it so that I can have a better reference. Copy, and then do a little paste. And then, gonna bring it over to here and paste it. So this is the end. I'm gonna merge this really quick. And I know I want this to loop back into here, so it looks like we need another in between here. And it'll go to about here. And now let's just see how this whole thing plays out, just figuring out the general speed of it. Okay. So it's not perfect. I'm gonna do like adjusting things later on, but for right now I'm basically just trying to get this basic guy in. Now I'm gonna figure out some of the eyeball stuff. Oh yeah, and I better save, because that was my issue last time. Yeah, just remember to save a lot. I could probably just like copy and paste this eyeball when it's just facing one direction, but sometimes, especially with eyes, if you just use the same frame, it'll look kind of dead. Because the one thing people look at, even on abstract creatures, is the eyes. Our eyes are immediately drawn to eyes. So that's the one thing you really need to be careful with on a frame by frame animation, is making sure that the eyes stay alive. Even like on a stationary, more like talking scene, or just even like some background characters, adding a couple eye blinks every so often, it suddenly transforms the character from being a lifeless doll into a living thing. More so than animating like the hair blowing in the wind or something like that. The eyes are the window to their brain. Really, your eyes are an extension of your brain, literally connected to your brain, and they grow out of your brain. So already I can see there's some spacing issues here. I know I need an in-between. I'll bring this guy back a little bit. And I'm going to add an in-between right here so that this doesn't jump as much when we play it. And I'm going to bring this guy over a little bit. Actually, he'll probably be about here. I'll add another in-between here. There we go. And this one I need to bring out a bit. I'm just thinking a lot about the arc shape. You don't want things to jitter. Arcs will keep things from jittering. And about here, the pupil's going to be facing us a little bit more directly. And it's going to slowly start to change its gaze. And I'll draw this one a little bit here, and I'll get one more in between here. Let's just see how this feels. I was trying to get some cozy music in the background, so that was kind of taking me a second to get started. But it worked on my test, but for some reason I couldn't get VLC and OBS to be synced up. So if you want to play your own music in the background, feel free to. Sometimes I will go non-verbal when I have to use my puny little baby brain to think a little bit more. And I'm not gonna be finishing any of these totally, not even the roughs. I'm just gonna kind of bounce around. So, but right now I at least want to get this eye figured out. Here it's gonna start changing. Draw those little cross guidelines to help me get the pupil situated. Sometimes it helps to turn the light box off so you can see the shape of the thing you're actually drawing instead of getting confused by the onion skinned frames. And here it's gonna start going up. Okay, that's looking decent-ish. All right. Got it, got it, got it. And then I know it's gonna turn over here. So this is a lot of frames. This is already at 59 frames. With in-betweens, it's gonna be like 120 almost. So I'm actually just gonna kind of quit on the eye for now and start thinking about the fish's body. And I know it's a kind of triangle shape. So what I'm gonna do is, you know, it's this general shape. I'm just gonna start animating the triangle shape and not worry about the appendages right now. We're just getting this shape of the fish in. As it's following behind the eye. And I like to scrub. You notice I'm going back and forth on the frames. Just kind of helps you see, helps you compare the previous frame to the current frame. And then just check the animation real quick. This is a pretty flat fish, but its body's gonna start turning as it gets closer to the curve here. So right as it gets down to here, we're gonna have them changing perspective a little bit. This triangle shape is starting to get narrower. It might be kind of growing a little too much, but we'll see. These are goopy creatures, so it's okay if they're a little bit extra squashy and stretchy than would be seen in reality. And as you can see, the eye is going this way, but because of follow through and overlapping action, the momentum of the fin will continue in the opposite direction before it catches up to the rest of the body. You never want everything moving and changing at the same time. Adding differences in the timing and spacing of different parts of a body, it creates texture and realism, or a more dynamic look. But I am awfully close to the edge here. I have to be really careful about hitting this corner. I might adjust that later. But I guess this looks okay. We'll hold them there for a little bit. We'll get a little bit closer to the edge without touching the corner. And the body is, the base of the body connected to the eyes going forward. Fins keep going back. Now the fins are going to start catching up to the eyeball. And this is dragging behind. Overlap, follow through, and drag. They're all interconnected. They show different aspects of a similar concept. And then secondary action can often be a part of that as well. But the overlapping and follow through is more about, well, as you can see, all these frames overlapping. Let's see what we got so far. Okay, I'm gonna save this so not a sad sack like it was last time. And check the chat. Anyone say anything? Kid Pin talking about TV Paint being too expensive to upgrade. Yes, I agree. And looking great. The motion path flows nicely. Yeah, motion paths, like I said, it just helps save a lot of headache. It keeps things flowing. The one on the squid I did was more of a tube because it was more of a 3D shape. And the back fin continues on this arcing path. And it starts to go down. There's something kind of meditative about this straight ahead style of animation. Pose to pose I feel like takes a lot more thinking, whereas straight ahead's a little bit more intuitive. It's kind of more what you do on special effects as well, such as fire or water splashes or smoke. It's harder to pose those things because they're a little bit more free flowing. But with fire I might get a couple super key shapes in and then straight ahead everything that connects back to the key poses. Ooh, it kind of looks like a Dorito. Might work on this just a couple more frames and then I'm gonna start on another creature because I think we get the idea on this one. And also sometimes I'll start like a bunch of loops and just kind of go by how I'm feeling about it, because sometimes taking a break and coming back will solve all your problems. It doesn't make sense to just hit your head against the wall forcing yourself to try to get it done if it's not working. So if you have multiple projects you're working on, you can keep that creative momentum going. However, you don't want to have too many projects going at once because then it's a lot harder to actually get momentum going in the first place because your energy is spread out across so many different directions. There's definitely a balance to strike. And the fin is going to continue to go down as the head goes up. And then, as the head is going on its arc, the fin starts to go up and come into the arc. And it's going to squash into itself a little more as it gets more up on the apex of the arc. And we're going to do a similar thing here, where, like on the other side, the body is starting to come towards us more. And continue in the opposite direction. And the Dorito starts to catch up. I think I'm gonna call this one taking a break from it for now, just because animation is tedious, and I think I've said enough about this one for now. But we have, just with the eye and the body, the shape of the body, we have the basic animation done. Now it's literally just a matter of adding in the little extra details that are pulled along by this motion. But it's really a super simple concept to just animate the leading action first, and then the second most important thing, and then all of the little overlapping and follow through loose bits. And it's really just a matter of doing a few simple steps over and over. It doesn't have to be super complicated. This fish is like kind of a similar concept. I probably want to animate this one, but this one I could almost see, just because he's more of a solid shape, I might just copy and paste some frames when he's going slow and then have him squash and stretch out far. Well, that one's, deal with that one later. Deal with that one later. Let's play with this jellyfish for a little bit. So this one kind of already have some key frames in here, and I know the color is going to be like that. But then it's going to have him, just erase that. It's going to have him, once he gets up here, we might have the body break apart and swoop down like this, doing a little Goopy morph. And these little parts trail off and dissipate, break apart, turn into goop, liquidy goop. And then he comes back into his jellyfish pose. So this one's kind of already got the main stuff thought out. However, you still have to do in-betweens. So the issue with this one is I dropped these colored poses in. They're already colored, so doing the in-betweens a little bit frustrating. I have to put on TV Paint, put the onion skinning on image color rather than color, but then it shows like the whole solid color, and that makes doing in-betweens a little bit more annoying. Go ahead and turn that off. Why am I doing this? Retina burning red. Okay, I'm gonna flip this horizontally and check the shapes. I feel like, yeah, it's already kind of wonky. It's weird how that helps, flipping it horizontally. Even on abstract shapes where it's like, it's not necessarily a correct way to draw the proportions, you can still feel if something feels off to you. You can catch it a little bit. Boom, boom. I don't know, that's, so it's like gonna do an arc thing. It's gonna be kind of like this. Obviously that's way too fast, but once I add more in-betweens it'll look like something. So I know he comes up, he needs to squash up when he comes up here so we can read the action better. This kind of looks like a cheeseburger. Get rid of that cheeseburgery shape, make it more just like a circle. Have them squash a little bit more. Okay, we're gonna have a really more extreme squash right here. Before he breaks apart into goo. I have to do some edits on a project later, but it's a human character and animating humans is harder because it's easier to be critical of what a human looks like because we look at them all day, whereas abstract weird stuff, there's no physical reference. You can't say that you're drawing this alien wrong because it doesn't exist. See what this looks like so far. Okay, I can live with this. Make this one stretch more into this next key so that we have a really bigger, strong silhouette here, almost like a moon. This will look really poppin' once I add cell shading to it. A long, glossy, shell-shaded goopiness. Come into here and it'll swirl around. Continue in this path of motion, swirl up, and it's gonna go up before it goes down. Before it goes down into its jellyfish stage. And I know here I need to have this guy squash before he goes up to anticipate the up. If you're drawing super simple limited animation like on a story time, you can tell pretty much any motion with just 4 key poses. You have a key frame, an anticipation frame, an overshoot, and then the key that the overshoot settles into. You can do everything with that. have this guy bunched together a little more. All right. Comes down. And this guy comes down a little bit. And we'll see what this looks like. He needs to go down even more. This is coming down. We'll have one more squashed frame here. The final squashed frame that he settles into before going up. We're just going to bring everything out just a little bit more. And of course there'll be in-betweens between these to make it just a little bit smoother. That is a flat jellyfish. It's like a pancake. Okay, now it looks like this. So now I know I want it to come into these two frames a little bit slower. It's kind of popping weird. Boom. So here and here, add an in between. So here, I'm actually going to hold this stretched up pose. I'm gonna have him go up. Okay, here he's just gonna stretch again. Stretch out a little bit more. Overshoot a little bit before he settles into the next one. Okay. Have his bottom go down more. These rough drawings, I'm kind of just sculpting out the shapes. It's not about clean line work, it's just all about the motion and the form. Something kind of funky going on right here. I think it's getting hung right here. Let's see. See, maybe I don't need an in-between right there. Okay. Okay. On the tip of this, see, I'm kind of having it get a little bit more rounded because this part's gonna break off, kind of like lava lamp liquid. and then turn into this little ball. And then back here, it's a big change right here, so this part breaks off as well. Okay, get it in between here. It stretches, pinches right here in the middle. And these pieces that break apart, they're kind of following the same force. So it's turning in this direction. These pieces that break apart go like this, and they continue following through that same direction. Like that. This part could come down a little bit more, and it kind of arcs in. So yeah, that's like basic thing, and I can go over it later. I need to add this middle purple shape here, like this part. And this inner contour line helps to make it look more 3D. Whenever you add any kind of contour line in between a shape, you can really help it to feel more 3D than if it was just the outer contour line. Like this shape here doesn't really look 3D. It just looks like a bean or something. But once we add this shape in here wrapping around it, this defines the form. If we were to add more, it'd be like this. Then it looks even more 3D if we add more of them. But that's not what this design has. It just has one little eyeball-y contour thing in the middle. I think I'm gonna do a drawing of abstract sci-fi type spaceshipy city thing, but draw it all with like a bunch of shapes and contour lines in the middle that creates this tapestry of abstract looking weird stuff. Live streaming is weird. I feel like I kind of forgot I was live streaming and talking. Try to check the chat in case anyone says anything. Like if you're working on something or anything like that. I'll try to be of two minds here. Okay, I know this part. Sometimes, like drawing any kind of extra details on something, it helps to draw it in a different color. Keep track of things, but I'm just doing it all in one color right now. In anime, they normally do, well, every studio is different, but I often see on the rough stage of animation, they'll draw all the stuff just regular black, but then they will use red to show where the highlights will go, and blue to show where the shadows will go. I do all my cell shading pretty much straight ahead, so I'm not even drawing outlines or anything for cell shading at this stage. I do it all in its own layer, and it's like a totally different thinking phase. Okay, so this is what this one feels like. Alright, I think I can live with that. It's getting awfully close to the edge up here. Gets a little bit awkwardly flat. Need to widen it out a little bit. And we'll see what this looks like. This rough stage is the stage to test stuff, because once you go into cleanup, you really don't want to have to reanimate anything, because change one frame, you have to change all the frames around it, and it's a total headache. I still feel like there might need to be an in-between right here, but I don't want to get rid of too much snap, although it is kind of underwater, so it might be okay if it's a little bit more mushy. Maybe I'll have this one coming out a little bit more, starting to favor the next frame, so that the frame in between this and the previous one can have a little bit more contrast. Here we go. I think this will make it feel better. And on this one, I'll favor the previous frame, so it's still up high, but it's starting to snap into this one. Okay, I like that way more. That feels a lot better. Let me save my April foolishness so I don't have a sad day. Brittany Kidpen says if you get too close to the edge, you could also select all the frames and shrink the whole animation down. That's true. Or if I get too close to one edge, I wouldn't even need to shrink it down. I could just select all the frames and just bring them down. But that depends on how low I'm getting to the bottom here. Yeah, I'm already too low at the bottom, so I would have to shrink it if I wanted to. As long as I'm not touching the edges, I'm not too concerned, because these will be for video editors and VJ artists and music video people, and they can of course resize and edit these clips however they want. But if stuff's touching the edge, then the second they move anything around, there'll be the edge that cut it off will show, and so that's something I always have to be a little mindful of. I'm getting another interesting shape here. Something I like about drawing this stuff, the goopy stuff, is you start to get shapes you wouldn't think of when you start adding the in-betweens or breakdowns. Because I wouldn't have thought to draw this for a jellyfish. And here, the bottom is dragging behind still. So I'm keeping this bottom part kind of down still so that we can read the stretched pose more. See, the bottom takes a second to catch up with the rest of it. And I think this is basically the animation for this one once I add in-betweens. Excuse me. So like that's like the whole thing, and that's only 15 frames. We got a whole loop there. Sometimes these loops go into like 100 frames or more. But something I like to do also is duplicate stuff. I'll show you that right here so you can get an idea what I'm talking about, and create interesting little patterns and clusters. So for instance, check this out. This is a turtle, but I want to make something more complicated. I'll just duplicate this, and then I'm going to select the frames and shrink it down to, let's just say 60%. I'll move it over here just for the sake of showing what I'm talking about. And then I'm gonna apply the transform and duplicate it again, but now move it over a little bit, and you can make a few of these and you start getting some detailed patterns going on. I'm going to just do one more and show you how to make a cluster of these. And this one, let's just say, let's move it right here. So this is like something video editors can do with these loops. And of course adding backgrounds will take it to the next level. But now, see, they're all kind of moving in unison, and that's pretty cool, but it also looks a little robotic. So if you want it to be a little more organic, you'd actually come down to the timeline and move them over a few frames. Let's say to frame 6. Let's just see what this looks like. Yeah, I like that. And see, now as the turtle is moving his head out, the other one is taking a while to catch up. It's kind of the same concept we've been doing with the overlap and follow through. Now I'll just take the finishing frames and paste them at the bottom so that he's still there, and delete these excess frames. And since I moved this one over 6 frames, we'll take the third one and move it over 12, so that now we're going to have this kind of polyrhythm of turtles. And it's going to look cool. Copy those, paste them at the bottom, and this is like 3 separate turtles, and now they kind of look like they're their own characters. And something you could also do is change the colors of them, like color shift them 12 or 23 or 45 degrees, and then they'd really kind of look like their own creatures, their own personalities. I probably won't do that, but I'll just kind of show you. I'll just kind of show you what I'm talking about. I like to do this kind of stuff on music videos. So like you can color shift them a little bit so that it's a little bit more dynamic with the color. So now it's like the middle one's kind of like the leader. You know, it's like just changing a few frames around or changing the colors, you can completely change the feeling or even the story of the exact same loops. This is literally just one loop, but you play with them like Lego blocks. And again, once you add backgrounds and panning backgrounds and foregrounds and layers and other loops around it, the possibilities are limitless. Something I like to do also is incorporate glitched footage, or even if the band sends me some live action of them playing live or even green screen, you can cut them out and put them in animated environments, and no one will ever know. No one will ever know you're just using the same loops over and over. At least that's what I tell myself. So I guess I'm done with that jellyfish. And, well, how long have I been streaming? Sometimes I run out of steam when I'm trying to talk and stream. I could kind of do this guy. Probably don't need this motion path. Doobie doobie doo. Jellyfish. This one. Yeah, this one. It's like this. Oh. I'll just start working on the tail here. Now the base of the tail. Actually, I'm just gonna start doing the base of the tail because that is what's pulling the rest of the tail. I'll deal with that later. Sometimes it helps to animate sections in their own thing one at a time. Like, for instance, you could just animating the tail is still animating something by itself, but you could also just animate parts of the tail by itself. It's like breaks it down even more into even more manageable chunks. Because everything else on the tail is basically following this base here. And then the middle of the tail will drag a couple frames, and the tip of the tail will drag a couple frames away from the middle. So it creates this nice progression. Like, for instance, if this was a tail, this was the base, and the base is moving this way, then the middle would be here dragging behind, the tip would still be over here. And then as the tail came over here, the middle is here, the base is here. Then once the tip is back here, the middle is dragging and the tip is starting to follow through. And then once this base moves in the opposite direction, the middle is still going this way and the tip is still going down and would have to catch up to the base. I did a tutorial on that on animating tails. It's an exercise that helps you with all these concepts. So already you can see just by having this base here, it's just a matter of connecting the middle and the tip to the base. The turtle was on ones at 15 frames a second. All of these are going to be at 15 frames a second. I'm animating on twos right now, which is effectively 7.5 frames a second. But on my program, I have it on 8 frames a second, which is basically imperceptible from 7.5. So the timing is accurate enough. So I know like this is how fast everything's going to be moving, basically. And then once I start shading stuff, it's going to look a little bit more like this. Have a shadow, highlight on the eye. Sometimes I'll use the Toon Shader in TV Paint. It's less accuracy, but it's certainly faster than cell shading stuff by hand. And it looks pretty good on some things, but other things, you just have to do things by hand or combine the two. I've noticed like sometimes it looks pretty cool to combine some toon shading, but then add some highlights by hand to make things pop even more. Okay, I think I'm having a little bit of an issue right here. The tail should be more like down here. That's awfully... Well, actually, I imagine the tail's right here. So I guess it makes sense it could be like that. Right here it needs to be more around here. It's okay to have it a little bit more here. And it can start coming down. So the reason, let me save this. The reason I usually work at 15 frames a second. Okay, I'll go back to here and put on a character. So 15 frames a second. Standard 2D film is 24 frames for traditional film. And full animations on ones, 24 frames a second. But 12 frames a second looks great for most actions. And then, but for live performance visuals that are on screens, like for concerts and DJ sets, typically is 30 frames a second minimum, and then like 60 frames if they're doing CG stuff. So I found that I could animate at 30 frames a second, but that's insanely hard. So I just take the same concept of animating on twos for 24 frames a second, but apply it to 30 frames a second, and you get 15 frames a second, which to my eye, 15 frames a second definitely looks smoother than 12 frames a second, even though it's 3 extra frames, but it's also way, way, way less work than animating at 24 frames a second. So 15 frames a second to me is just the perfect balance of the snappiness of 12 frames a second with the smoothness of 24 frames a second. And it's just economical. It makes sense for the context of what I'm doing for live performance stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the main reason. It's like it looks cool, but it's also less work than 24 and 30. And it has the snappiness of 12, but it's not as choppy as 12. Especially on these kind of goopy stuff. If I did this at 12, this is 12 frames a second. Already, I don't know if this stream is picking it up, but it's so much more choppy. Now, of course, if I was animating this natively at 12 frames a second, the spacing would be different to compensate, and I would be doing things with the spacing and overlap to make it look smoother. So it also matters what you're animating for to begin with. Something that was meant to be animated at 24 frames a second, and then you add AI interpolation over it to make it 60 frames a second, you're taking all the weight out, and it's going to make it uncanny and floaty and weightless. So it's all interconnected. Like the timing, the spacing is not separate from the frame rate. It's all this interconnected web. And then like if this was 24 frames a second, I guess that looks alright. But it doesn't look that much different from 15 frames to me. Of course, my program's lagging a little bit because I'm running a bunch of stuff. Oh, wait a second. Wait, is this 30? Oh my god. I'm dumb. Okay. This is on 2s. So at 30 frames a second, this is technically 15 frames a second. When I was showing 12 before, that was really 6 because I forgot on the timeline I already put this, I duplicated the frames. So anyways, everything else I said was I meant to say, but whatever. I hope that made sense. Also, like, yeah, if you're like rotoscoping, you're gonna experience different effects depending on what your frame rate is. But something that also helps a lot with rotoscoping or even just doing live action references to not completely perfectly reference or perfectly trace stuff, because then it will feel weightless. You still have to exaggerate and add a little bit of squash and stretch, and maybe even add some held frames so it reads. It's really interesting, just the limitless possibilities there are. This is the first frame. I put X's here so I don't actually start animating on it. Yeah, I think I might be kind of over this one for now. And I'll save. And yeah, so like that. This whale's on 3s. You'll see that it's more choppy. So on 3s at 30 frames a second, this whale is really 10 frames a second. But you can tell it's more choppy. Anyways, I think I'm done. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. I have a fire course, link in the description. Also, check out the other animation tutorials on the channel. It helps the channel grow, and I greatly appreciate everyone watching. And I might stream again next week, perhaps. Definitely, maybe, but probably not. See ya. Wait. Camera. Hold on. That's not how I stop streaming. I have to click on a thing. How do I get out of this situation?